What if you could use comics to teach spirituality? What if comic books could be as effective, or perhaps even more effective, than religious books to teach spirituality? I asked myself this question several years ago, and they were strange questions to ask. And I'm going to share with you why they were strange, how it led to a creative breakthrough, and what I learned about creative breakthroughs. I grew up in Dubai in the 90s. And like many kids growing up in Dubai, I loved to read comics. I remember reading comics like Tintin, Asterix, Amachitrakatha, Tinkle, and I loved them. I remember the adventures of Tintin where he would travel around the world solving mysteries. The adventures of Asterix where he had to fight people much stronger than him, but by being clever he could overcome them. And it was not just about entertainment. I learned a lot through comics. Living outside India, my whole introduction to Indian history, Indian culture, Indian mythology came from those comics. Now, like a lot of other kids growing up in Dubai, I would also attend a madrasa in the evening, and over there as well, I would learn stories. I would learn stories of the prophets and the imams, and they would teach me lessons like, why are we here? What's our purpose in life? How do we deal with challenges? What happens when we die? So I grew up learning these stories, and these stories really shaped who I became. Now, fast forward to 2002, that's when I moved to India and I made Bangalore my home. And I made a lot of new friends here, and friends from different faiths. And I had this desire to share the stories that I learned in the madrasa while I was growing up with my new friends. Because I realized not many people knew about these stories. But here was the thing. These stories were only available in the form of text or in books. And I realized that if I had to share these stories, they're not going to be that interesting or that fun to read. So something interesting was also happening in parallel, that I was learning how to draw. And as I got good at drawing, a thought that occurred to me. How can I make this skill more useful? What can I do with this new skill that I've learned? And the idea that occurred was, what if I take the stories that I learned in my madrasa and put them in the form of comics so that I can share it with my new friends? I was so excited. Wow, all the fun that I had learning and reading comics, I can bring them in the stories that I loved and share them with my friends. But honestly, I was also very fearful. There was a part of me that was saying, what if people start criticizing you in what you're doing? It's never been done before. How can you put these sacred stories in a new form that is an entertainment medium? What's going to happen? So for some time I held back. I was like, let me think about this before I take this step. But the voice inside me that was really excited and felt that, this would be something really worthwhile doing, really encouraged me to go ahead and take the step and gave me the courage to try this out. So I'm going to share with you some of the stories that I shared. I created these stories and I would put them online. At that time, Facebook was very popular, so I would put them on Facebook, I would share them on my blog, and people would read them. So here are some stories that I put up many years ago. So the first story is, how far is heaven? So there are a group of people who come to Imam Ali and ask, how far is heaven? Maybe this is a question we might have had at some point. Okay, we want to go to heaven. How do we get to heaven? And he responds, he says, it is just 2 steps away. And the man is surprised, he's shocked. He says, only 2 steps? Which 2 steps? So he says, the first step is on your nafs, which is the Arabic for ego. You overcome your ego, you step on your ego, you control it, and the next step is in heaven. And here's another story. It's called Mother. And a man comes to the Prophet and asks, who has greater right over me, my mother or my father? Anyway, as kids growing up, you would have some auntie in your family asking a similar question. Who do you love more, your mother or your father? And that's a trick question. There's no right answer to it. But nonetheless, someone comes and asks the Prophet something similar. Who has greater right? And the Prophet says, your mother. And then, again he says, your mother. And then, again he says, your mother, and then your father. So the man asks, why do you give the mother 3 rights to the father just 1? So the Prophet goes to respond and he says, your mother, she gave birth to you, she carried you, she cleaned you, she suckled you, and for years she took care of you. And even when you were 40, 50, and 60, she still followed your progress with interest. So the man asks, can I repay her for all that she's done for me? The Prophet says, not even 1 night's due. But suppose I carry her on my back for years, cook for her and feed her. Can I repay her? And the Prophet says, there will still be this difference. She looked for you to live while you are waiting for her to die. So I would put these comics online and I would share them, not showing what response I would get. But surprisingly, a lot of people liked them. They started sharing them. And I think what was very encouraging was there were teachers around the world who also had the similar challenge that they wanted to share these stories with their students or with the people around them. So they would do that. I would get emails from teachers in different madrasas around the world that we are sharing these stories. I would get even emails from professors saying that they are sharing these comics in their universities. And perhaps what was very encouraging was that people were translating these comics in their respective languages and sharing them. So I was very encouraged, very happy, and eventually these comics became books. From the first book, 40 Sufi Comics, there came several other books. We have 7 books now that we have published. So I started reflecting on, what made this idea work, what was the reason it got popular. And there could be several reasons, but there was one thing that really stuck with me. That creative breakthroughs, one of the reasons why it happens, is when you combine 2 unrelated ideas or 2 unrelated interests, and in this intersection of that, you have a creative breakthrough. There are 2 examples that come to mind that I'll share with you. One is that of Steve Jobs. One is that of Steve Jobs, where he took his interest in calligraphy, which came when he dropped out of school, dropped out of college, and he took a class in calligraphy, and he developed that interest in calligraphy. And when many years later, when he was building the Macintosh computer, he took that interest in calligraphy and he brought that into this new Macintosh computer, which gave the birth and the rise to creating interesting typography and fonts on the computer, which was not available before. Before, computers were very boring to use, right? Because they had these green fonts that looked all the same. And his interest in calligraphy and typography, bringing that into the computer, really boosted the revolution in personal computing. Another example that comes to mind is that is more recent, that is of Geoffrey Hinton. Now, Geoffrey Hinton is known as the godfather of AI. And it's very interesting, for a long time people have been working on AI, but what he did that really gave rise to this modern AI was take his interest in psychology, in how the mind works, and in language, and merge that with computer science. And in doing so, what he was able to do is create large language model and neural networks that power applications like ChatGPT. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you are looking for a creative breakthrough, and if you really want that, and if you want to combine different ideas to make that happen, there has never been a better time. This is almost like the golden era for combining ideas and having these creative breakthroughs. Because thanks to AI, it is now cheaper, it is faster, it is more easier to combine different ideas and make your ideas come to life. When I was working on Sufi Comics, there's so much that needed to go in. It was not just about storytelling and drawing. It was about social media, making a website, printing, publishing, coordinating with volunteers, translation. There's a whole lot of effort that went into it. But now a lot of that effort can be automated. So that means if you have a spark, if you have an idea and you want to bring it to life, you can do it over a weekend. And not only that, you can combine different fields and create something new. For example, if you're a teacher, let's say you're a history teacher, and you want to make your classes and your teaching more exciting and more immersive, you can create a chatbot and have that chatbot have the personality and the history and the information of a historical character, like say either Akbar or Gandhi, and you can have your students chat with them as if he was there really in the classroom. Or if you have an idea of an app, maybe you like cooking, maybe you like cricket, and you want to make an app out of it, you can do that over a weekend. Or if you love poetry, and if you have written something and if you want it sung, maybe in your own voice or someone else's voice, you can have that done too. Now, when you start creating on your ideas, when you start working on them, I'll be honest, not every idea is going to work out. When I was working on Sufi Comics, I had a lot of failures on the way. A lot of things didn't work out as I planned. But the more you try, and the more failures you have, the more you will learn. And now it's faster and easier to try things out and fail and learn, and then eventually you'll have a breakthrough. When I combined my ideas, Sufi Comics was a project that came up. What will happen when you combine your interests and your ideas at the intersection of it? What will you create? I really hope you will try, and I really look forward to seeing what you create. Thank you.